Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of our Network Ed seminars for this new academic year. Network Ed is a series of seminars which gives the LSE the opportunity to invite speakers to discuss a range of issues relating to online learning technologies and the internet more generally. It also provides us with an opportunity for trying out different technologies, particularly lightweight technologies, ones which are cheap and easy to use, that hopefully we can then feed back into more general teaching within the school for the benefit of us all. This afternoon, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Diana Laurillard from the Institute of Education. Diana has been hugely influential in educational technology circles for a number of years, and recently she has written a new book called Teaching as a Design Science that I'd strongly recommend, and her talk today will be drawing on some of those ideas that she's been exploring in that publication. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Diana.
Thank you very much, Steve. And thank you very much for the invitation here as well. And to be part of this series, which is actually doing the developing of reliable knowledge of learning technology just by being here is great. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to talk about the idea of teaching as a design science and try to illustrate that with some of the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years in an ESRC-EPSRC research program that actually Steve, Ryan and LSE were part of. So it's like coming home, actually, just being here. So that's great. What I mean by teaching as a design science is developing the idea of teachers as an innovative professional learning community. And that means reconceptualizing what we mean by teaching, not as traditionally often felt to be, and sometimes is still quoted as if, it's a process of transmitting the knowledge of the community or of the society, but really conceptualizing it as a process by which we're trying to do something in the world. We're trying to change something. We're trying to take the world into a different place, which is essentially what education is doing, trying to enable people to become something which they can't be without education. And in that process, because it's so difficult, we need to treat it like something that we need to explore and find out about and take an iterative approach to. So it's much more like trying to make something in the way that engineers make something. And they try it out, they make it, they see it doesn't quite work, and you go back to basic principles and redesign it, work it out. It's that kind of iterative process to figure out how to make teaching work. And given that we've got this extraordinary opportunity of new digital technologies has been flung into our path, it's a fantastic opportunity to rethink the way that we do education, but it's very, very difficult to do. So the notion of reconceptualizing the teaching community as being this innovative professional learning community, which in itself is acting much more like the way that the research community operates, where we wouldn't dream to be operating on our own, we wouldn't dream to be launching into doing something new without looking at what's gone before, without knowing what's in the literature, without knowing what other people have done. And trying to think of teaching as being much more like that kind of thing. Which means teachers building on the designs of others, not just launching into the way we do it, but seeing what other people have done who want to try and take students on this particular kind of journey. And then articulating our pedagogy. What do we mean by what we're trying to do with learners and how we achieve that kind of learning outcome, which is so complex. And then being able to adopt what other people have done, but also adapt it. We don't just want to take it over wholesale. You have to take over a textbook. It's not like that anymore. You want to be able to change it, customize it, adapt it to your own teaching location. And then trying it out with your students, and then figuring out, just as an engineer does, this doesn't quite work, I need to go back and redesign it, testing it, improving it, and then, just as we do in science, just as we do in research, sharing it back with the rest of the community. So it becomes the means by which we build the knowledge of how to use learning technologies. And for that, we're going to need something like a computational representation of pedagogic design. So we're looking here for the way in which the digital technologies can help us do all this. It's a complex task. Surely the digital technologies should be able to help us. But that does mean having a computational representation of what we're trying to do. Well, it's a kind of bizarre idea, trying to think about teaching and learning as something that you can represent computationally and support computationally. So should we be even doing it at all? And I think it's worth trying out, because teachers, and here I'm not really differentiating between higher education, further education, schools, vocational education, professional education. I mean, learning theories talk about the way humans learn, and I think what we're talking about is the way that teaching and learning works between humans, whatever kind they are. So when I say teachers, I think you can interpret that as lecturers in a place like LSE, or you could equally well interpret it as teachers in a primary school the world over. And whoever we are, we need more help than we're currently getting to make the most of technologies. And if we can learn this process together, collaborate, build on each other's work, then we can begin to build this new knowledge of what it means to be teaching through and with technology. And that doesn't mean just going on staff development courses. It doesn't mean going on a half-day workshop and then somehow we've magically got it all. It's not going to be like that. So we need to be working in a way that is more akin to the way we work in the context of research and scholarship. And that's why we had this project called the Learning Design Support Environment, which built the Learning Designer. And that's what I want to try and express to you, how that works. The idea was to help teachers articulate the effective learning designs for others to adopt pedagogical patterns, by which I mean the means by which you help your learners learn this learning outcome. And a pattern will be, you start by doing this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And I've figured this out in such a way that by doing all this, you will ultimately achieve the kind of learning outcome I think is appropriate. Now, that's essentially what teachers do anyway. That's what all teachers do all the time. As soon as you go into a lecture, there's a sense in which you're doing that. You're making an assumption that they've already read certain kinds of things, they've had other lectures, they've got an education behind them, they're capable of understanding this narrative line, and after the lecture they're going to do this, this, and this. I mean, that is what we do as educators. So whether you call it learning designs or pedagogical patterns or lesson plans or design plans, whatever it is, it's that sort of thing. And when you've figured out a good way of doing it, then being able to articulate that and also being able to bring into it existing open education resources, such as videos or such as simulations or such as diagrams, whatever it might be, then you've got something which you can shape to what your learning context needs, but also, if you can articulate it, something you can pass on to others. So it means being able to model both the pedagogical and logistical benefits and disadvantages of what we're doing with learning technologies. Because as we move into doing this, we need to be fairly sure that we're getting some benefit from it. At least we should be sure that we're getting pedagogical benefit from it, and that we're not getting massive logistical disadvantage in terms of it's taking teachers an awful lot more time than it ever did before. That won't do. So we've got to be able to model where this is taking us in terms of design advantage. And the tools that we developed were a pedagogical patterns collector, which is an online website, and I'll give you the location of that in a minute, and which is where we capture and articulate good pedagogies, but also a learning design support tool, which is a more intelligent tool, which is designed to support the process of design and experimentation and building on what other people have done as well in a more elaborate way. These slides, by the way, should be available now on the CLT Network Ed website, and will certainly be available to everybody afterwards. So I know they're a bit complicated, so please don't feel you have to take notes. But that URL, the tiny URL .com/PP Collector 3 is the website where you could, if you wanted to, link it. I shouldn't have said that because you'll all now do it and you won't listen to me, but it's where you can sort of follow through what I'm trying to talk about. So I'm talking about capturing pedagogy. What does that mean? This is the kind of thing a design plan might be for not just a lecture, but what comes before the lecture and what carries on during the lecture and what follows it. Or in this case, it's a kind of a lab. This is from one of the other projects in the same series, the TLRP-TEL projects. The HAP-TEL project was run at King's College, and they were looking at changing the way in which they teach dentists to drill teeth. So you'll be pleased to know they've got a better way of doing it than going straight from plastic heads to people. They've now got a Haptel version of this technology, which allows them to model in a computational way what's happening when you're trying to learn how to drill teeth. Now, to do that, they had to switch from the traditional pedagogy, which was in that one, which is where you've got plastic teeth and a lab in which tutors go around and look at what students have done, and they've destroyed the teeth, so they have to throw away the teeth, get another one. And this virtual lab, in which you're working with 3D glasses and a model, and you're working in a virtual environment, so that when you make a complete mess of it, you can just rewind and start again. And not only that, but the tutor can come around and see what you've done, you kind of action replay, and give you much better feedback. So there's all sorts of advantages in moving to that kind of thing. But what does it actually mean in terms of the way you set that up? And this is the way in which you might lay out this kind of thing. You have a short description of what the learning activity is. You have a well-defined learning outcome, and all of these are essentially about trying to help students do something. So the learning outcome is critical, because that's going to shape the way in which you plan the activities. And then what's slightly unusual is that each of this sequence of activities that you take students through is categorized in some way. And of course, there are many different ways of categorizing it. And I want to come to what we did about trying to categorize learning activities. But that's what allows you to begin to see patterns in the way that we support people. The timing is important. How much time you're spending on each different kind of activity, of course, will change the nature of the pedagogy. And then you'll notice that the text is in different colors. The black text is where the pedagogy is, and the colored text is the content. And what I'm going to try and show you is how we try to take a learning design which is built for a particular context, a particular subject matter context, take the content out and put new content in. And in that way, migrate the pedagogy from one content area to another, because there's some great pedagogy here. And there's no reason why it should be immured forever just in dentistry. If they've got a good way of helping students learn a new kind of skill and relate it to the theory that they have, that could probably work in a number of different subject areas. So we built the patterns collector to do just that. It's a computational representation, and this is what you see on the website. I'm going to go to the browser first, which is where you see on the right-hand side there's a library of existing designs which other people have put in using the same design process. And those are listed according to the kind of thing they do, like looking at the effects of system inputs on outputs, evaluating multiple interpretations, a predict, observe, explain pattern. Some of them quite familiar kinds of patterns from teaching and learning, but some not so familiar. On the left-hand side, we've got the representation of the kind of design pattern which I just showed, where you've got a briefing session, and then you've got a planning, data collection, and then collecting data. So this is being done for the pattern which is called relating theoretical knowledge to practice. And it's done in the context of classroom teaching, where they're getting students to go and look at the way in which they teach in a practical situation, get a colleague to video what they're doing, or take photographs, I think, in this case, what they're doing. And that's done in terms of the looking at how well they're engaging students. So what we've done is to parameterize those content areas, which means that you can take those particular parameters away and put in new ones. So this same kind of teaching idea has been adapted to a vocational teaching situation in which you're trying to teach people about customer service, and they're videoing each other's interactions with respect to how you smile at people when you do customer service. But if you can see what's happening there as I flip between those, you see that the black text is staying the same, and just the colored text is changing. So it's a way of trying to make sure that as we're adopting and adapting patterns and trying to build this community of practice, it's not just isolated within each particular subject area, because there is good pedagogy which can migrate across different subject areas quite successfully. The next phase is then to adopt it, but also adapt it. Because as we're taking on other people's teaching ideas, there is no way that I want to keep someone else's teaching ideas intact completely. There's always going to be something I want to tweak. And this, I think, is one of the big problems with open educational resources. They can be quite difficult to customize and change to what you want. But if you can use this kind of approach to bring those resources in, but build your own pedagogy around it, then there's some chance that we might use and exchange those resources a bit better. And this means I've taken it on the way that someone else has used a video, let's say, but I'm creating my own student instructions around it. So what you have here is the opportunity to categorize the nature of this particular activity. Is this a read, watch, listen activity? It's just learning through acquisition. Or you're getting the students to do inquiry learning through investigating something. Or are they learning through discussion, through practice, through sharing, or through producing? So you can change that. Or you can change the text which is in the activity, so you change exactly what you get students to do. You can also add new ones to each stage if you want to, and as you go, it's categorizing each of these. See, there's a kind of color coding attached to each of those. So let's see, practice, learning through practice is this kind of unpleasant green color, and we can see here what the overall pattern is like of the kind of learning experience we're creating. And as we look at that, I can see, for example, that I've got a fair amount of collaboration in here, and I haven't got all that much reading and listening, and so there's not very much input going in. It's mostly activity by the students. They're not learning through acquisition all that much. Now, that might be entirely right for this particular kind of pattern. And there's nothing to say what's a good or a bad or a right or a wrong way of doing it, but it is an opportunity for people to reflect and see, well, is that really what I mean? You can also decide whether the teacher is present or not. So if you're developing an online activity, then maybe you've got the teacher in there for a bit, but then the teacher is no longer there. It's asynchronous. It runs asynchronously or something. You can add in a link to some existing digital tool or resource. And then when you've got the pattern organized, you can export it to Word as a sort of re-represented in the way that I had it in the first place. But what we really want to do is export it to Moodle. That would be ideal. So each of these kinds of activities can be exported to a particular kind of activity in Moodle. So we've done some kind of mapping there so that we can try to represent it so that this could then become a kind of pedagogic front end, getting people to think about the pedagogy rather than precisely how to lay things out. And you automate that, the pedagogy of getting your teaching idea into your VLE. That's the idea. But this then becomes then the process by which we might adopt, adapt, import various resources, test it on our own students, redesign, and then export it to the rest of the world. So the kinds of comments we've had on this when we try it out with people are, they really like the pie chart. It's colorful, and it's, you know, for once you get some feedback on what your design might be actually doing with students. Gives a good overview of the balance between different learning experiences. I rarely consider how students' time is apportioned. It's good to be made to think about this, and that is quite interesting, actually, because we're used to understanding how to organize time when we're with students in a face-to-face session like this. But most of the time, students aren't with us. And especially with online learning, the more asynchronous it gets, the more we have to think about how long do we actually want students to be looking at this resource or spending in this discussion group or working together to make something together or whatever. We've got to have a view of what would be the expectation. They may not stick to it, it doesn't matter, but we ought to be thinking in terms of how are they spending all those hours when they're not with us. So that's why we developed the Patterns Collector, was to have a way of expressing these things. The website's quite easy to use, and you can log into it from anywhere, from most places at least. Some places there's a port problem, which we're trying to fix. But it's a fairly straightforward way of being able to collect people's pedagogic ideas. The Learning Designer is a more sophisticated, but therefore also a slightly more complicated tool to learn. It looks like this. There's a start screen where you can import an existing design, just as before. So on the left-hand side, there's a place where we can put a library of people's local designs or things which are more widely available. Or you can create your own. You can just start from scratch. The next screen is the overview of the properties of this. So this is it's like the metadata, really. It's how many students is it, when does it start and stop, what level is it, what learning outcomes does it have, and the designer's reflection and the place for student feedback. So this, and the cohort size, the total number of students that have run with it or that you want to run with it, which you would also, of course, change. So those properties define the context within which this design is sitting. And this is the design page. So it has some similarities to the pedagogical patterns collector in the sense that it has a sequence of different kinds of activity that build up to what you need to do to get the learning outcome. That's the timeline. And you select different kinds of teaching learning activities to put onto it, and you can see the color-coded analysis of what kind of learning activity this is for each one. Underneath is the representation of what you're asking students to do, with the analysis of what the group size is, and so on. So that's where the articulation of the pedagogy is, or where you're looking at someone else's articulation of their pedagogy. Then, because the program has all that information about the kind of teaching learning activity you've got, for each of those it also has default estimates of how much time it takes the teacher to prepare an hour of online collaborative learning and how much time it needs them to be present at that, which is, if you've got a student-only activity, is 0. But if you've got a teacher doing some kind of online Illuminate activity or something, would be the same amount of time the students spend. So all of that can give us an analysis also of how much time it takes for the teacher to develop this. Now, that's the kind of representation that we have in the program, but it depends on having this kind of analysis of what kind of teaching and learning is going on. And I just want to go briefly through what sits underneath that. And that comes from a theory-based framework of what it takes for learners to learn. This is something which has gone into in the book in more detail, but I'll go through it briefly now, because I think it's important to try and defend the pie chart, as it were. Where on earth does all that come from? So this is about the simplest representation you could have of what it takes to learn, what's going on when a learner is learning. There are concepts, and there is practice, or there's theory and there's experience. There's what Noel Entwistle calls ways of thinking and ways of practicing. And those are the things that we're trying to develop, the conceptual ideas and the ways in which we use those ideas in the world in some way. And we want to try and make sure there's a connection between them. So you've not only got a cyclical process where you're rethinking your practice, but you're also trying to connect that to your concepts. That's what's going on there. Now, that can happen without a teacher. If we bring a teacher into it, then one of the ways in which we get those cycles going is by talking and getting people to read and getting people to watch videos and look at websites and so on. And so that can help to change some of those concepts, but it's not really setting up a cyclical process unless you get the students asking questions or doing their own investigations. So as soon as you get that kind of thing going, and they're inquiring of the book or they're asking questions of the teacher, then that prompts more of a cyclical process to help to develop those concepts. So that's what we call learning through acquisition, or learning through instruction, and learning through inquiry. But we also get students to learn through practice, through setting up some kind of learning environment, which might be traditionally a lab, or it might be fieldwork, or something of that kind, exercises, writing exercises, or something like that. And here, there is some kind of task which the learner tries to complete, and there will be some feedback from that simulation or from that lab, which shows them that they haven't quite got it. So they have to not just work at the practice level, but bring in some of their concepts, which then makes them rethink the practice and gives them some feedback which makes them rethink the concepts. And so you get those cycles of processing going on at both levels. That's the point of having learning through practice, is it makes us think about what we're doing and what that means for what we're thinking. And then it's not just learning through acquiring and inquiring and practicing, but we also learn through our peers or other learners. And they will also have their own conceptual ideas, and they will be exchanging with us ideas and questions, and as soon as I get asked a question, it makes me think a different way. I express an idea, it makes them think a different way, they give something back to me, and so on. So that learning through discussion with our peers is another important way of getting that conceptual processing going. Like a kind of, it's like a kind of engine of fueling of the way in which we're developing our concepts. Similarly with practice, if you look at what someone else is doing, you exchange essay plans or you exchange translations if you're trying to get a better translation of a Latin text or whatever it might be. The exchange of practice can be as valuable as the exchange of ideas. So all of those are ways in which we get these juices of conceptualization and practice and learning through experience going. And what that's trying to do, really, is to represent all the different ways in which scholars and researchers have represented what's going on in learning, whether it's Dewey or Vygotsky or Piaget or Gagné or whomsoever it is. And what I've tried to do here is to represent these on that framework. So there is instructivism, which is teacher and learner practice, teacher gives feedback, learner practice. Social constructivism, interaction between peers. Experiential learning, that's peers and practice and exchange. Inquiry learning is learners learning of the teacher or of the representations of the teacher. Collaborative learning, sharing practice. Constructionism from Papert is trying to make something, see how it works, and then revise it and learn through that process. So what I'm trying to do is to use what we know about teaching and learning from all these different people who've tried to describe what's going on and bring it together in a way that's simplistic enough, and this is a simplistic representation after all, but it's simple enough that we can use it to then challenge what the technology offers us, because it doesn't offer everything. And if we look at what it does for all those different kinds of learning, we can say that learning through acquisition, podcasts are very good, websites, webcasts, and so on. Learning through inquiry, there's masses of web sources. We can send students off to do great web quests and web inquiries and more than they could expect to do in the library. But it is only that kind of learning through inquiry. Webinars and forums and discussion sites and chat rooms and so on are very good for learners exchanging ideas with each other. Different kinds of practice tools enable learners to try things out, try making something, seeing how well they do, and then producing designs or analyses or programs or productions of some kind, even performances, perhaps. And collaboration tools, of which there aren't too many, but that's what allows students to try and build something together and discuss what they're building. So those color representations there are meant to show where the pie chart comes from. So by saying that what we're trying to do in setting up online learning or blended learning or traditional learning is trying to cover all of that framework as much as we possibly can, because all of those things help students think and rethink and reconceptualize and use in practice and learn from their practice to rethink and shape their ways of thinking and practicing. And all of those are the things that we're trying to get moving. So as we're getting academics and teachers to think about the new pedagogies, we probably will need to do some co-creation. We probably will need to collaborate and learn from each other. And that will mean importing existing learning designs, using advice and guidance, considering alternative designs, adapting it to our own context, analyzing, redesigning, testing, improving, sharing. And those are the things that we're trying to build into the learning designer. So if we're thinking about co-creating, then we would be importing some existing design at this stage, perhaps. We would then be adapting it by maybe changing the learning outcome, and as soon as you change that, then the software knows what your new learning outcome is, so it can reevaluate it and reassign the nature of that kind of learning process. What happened there? Yes, we went into that. And so on the design panel, This is a representation of a learning session, and this one, it's about flexible language learning, so learners are working online trying to learn each other's languages, and at this point they're discussing with each other how to approach the problem, and this one being highlighted shows that it's a peer-assessed formative assignment, and what the software is doing is saying if you've got that kind of activity, you might like to think about instead having a technology-enhanced learning-based peer-assessed formative assignment. And it'll give you some advice and guidance on that and suggest alternative learning activities. So you've got something coming from the database of what everybody else has been creating to support that process of thinking, is this the best way to do it? Is there another way to do it? Can I improve on it? And because it has all that information, it can also represent it back to you in terms of what you've designed. So this is the pie chart interpreted in terms of the conversational framework. But it also has all that default data which says how much teacher contact time and teacher preparation time is involved in putting that whole thing together. It shows you if you're preparing from scratch, this particular one was going to take 15 hours worth of preparation. But if you reuse, it could come down to 1 hour. So that is a way of prompting and persuading people to think about using pre-existing videos or resources of some kind. Of course, all the data sitting under this has to be editable because it's default data. There's nothing to say exactly how long it takes to prepare a lecture, for a 1 hour lecture. I mean, it could be nothing or 50 hours. I mean, it can be anything. So you have to make that kind of guesstimate of approximately what could we say is a reasonable amount of time, and then leave it up to the designer to change those input parameters. But that's what gives us the option to examine how well the teacher workload is going, because it's very easy with new technology to make all sorts of wonderful stuff, but actually you've completely overworked the teachers. Or you've completely underused other people's work by not reusing. So that's what it's trying to do. Then you can redesign using this drop-down menu here to say, okay, I think I'll go back now. I didn't have that quite right. I'm going to select another kind of activity for this session here and see if I can change my workload or change the student experience in some way and improve it. Once you've got something which you think works, you can then share it either in a local repository with your students or with other academics in your team, or send it to a departmental website or to an institutional website or to the world, just as open education resources are. But this is all really a kind of meta-level capturing of what it is that's been designed, which is, because it's computationally represented, is interpretable by VLEs and other kinds of systems. So it's a way of saying we can give a front end to not having to think so much about what particular activity I need in Moodle to do this. There should be a translation from this kind of thing, so that you're just thinking about the pedagogy, just focusing on that, because that is what it's so important for us to discover. So what I'm going to do is just finalize the comments on this bit and then pause for a minute to see if there's any questions and discussions on this before getting into just about 4 or 5 more slides on the workload issue, because I think the teacher workload issue is particularly critical, but I don't want to get onto that until you've had a chance to interrogate this bit. So the comments on this overall approach from teachers in higher and further education, it's been taken a little bit into schools, but not so much in schools. Teachers respond positively to the learning designer tools and see this as a way of improving teaching, potentially of saving time. The learning designer concepts of sharing designs, reuse, adaptation, advice, analysis, suggestions of alternatives, and categorization designs are welcomed by teachers. And teachers commented on the added value of the detailed descriptions of the pedagogy, which enable them to have a more in-depth conversation about their practice and what makes a learning design more effective. There are also some negative comments, and I'll come on to those right at the end. But this is what teachers have found valuable in the workshops that we've done with them to try this kind of approach out. So that's where I'm going to pause and see if you have any reflections yourselves on this overall approach.
Could I just say, before you ask a question, will you wait for the microphone to come round? Because otherwise the people who are listening online will hear your question.
Do we have a microphone? We do. Just waiting for the microphone to come. Actually, we're waiting for a question. Or comment.
I'll start whilst it
Okay.
Diana, as you know, I'm very supportive of this kind of approach, but one argument that sometimes is put forward is what really is the balance between the teacher planning and designing a session and the space for agile learning, contingency, responding to what happens in class. How do you address those kind of issues with this kind of framework?
How is it different from what normally happens?
I don't actually think it is different, but I think some people feel that you could be seen as trying to almost over-design what will happen and try and predict almost too much what responses you do.
Yes, I mean, you can't, if you've got a live teaching session, you can't be sure what's going to happen. And one of the reasons that we've never had to do this before is that when you're teaching in a live session, you can react on the fly, and you can respond to the kinds of questions people have. But with online learning, so much of the time what we're doing is trying to design how students will work without us being present. And that's, I think, why we have to think more about how we're going to help them. What exactly do they do? What does it mean to be learning this? What kinds of things do they need to be doing to learn this? So I think that's the imperative. And after that, if you are teaching on the fly and you have designed, I mean, teachers go into schools with their lesson plans every day, and of course they don't always work out exactly as they expect. You do that too. They're not written in stone, you know, they're just code. You just change it. So I don't think it's a real issue, honestly.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting. I'd be interested if you spoke about good pedagogy, but maybe I missed this, but I didn't have a definition of what the underpinning notion of good pedagogy is. And I was I was very interested in the sort of pedagogical planner and the idea that people will be uploading their own plans, but I wondered is there any evaluation process going on? How do we know that these plans are so-called good pedagogy?
No, we can't and we don't. And I don't think there's any point in trying to have an automated evaluation of what people are doing. So the pie chart is never described as evaluation. It's described as analysis or feedback. It's just reflecting back to you what you've designed in. And there is, I mean, the reason I went through the conversational framework stuff was to represent how complex the teaching learning process is. You know, there's a lot of different kinds of things going on. There's a lot of different ways of learning and of processing things. And when we're thinking about a particular activity or a particular technology, it's worth saying, well, just how much of the conversational framework, or whatever other framework you have, does that really deliver on? People can get very excited about podcasts, but you know, it's just that one, it's just like a book, only not quite as good. So the technologies don't do that much, and it's important to see that students need all of those different things. They do need the active forms of learning, as well as just reading and looking at videos and Khan Academy and all the rest of it. You know, that's not enough. So if there's any kind of message at all, I suppose it's that the pie chart represents what ought to be some kind of mix. And it's up to you. It's your decision. You know, it could be perfectly fine to have an entire thing about acquisition learning. That's appropriate for this, fine. But you've got to know that's what you're doing. But I don't think we can be descriptive, because as I said, this is all about exploring and developing the knowledge, really. So, one more, yeah. One more question? Let's just take. Oh, two more questions. No, you go.
Okay, first comment. I found it really interesting the approach where you involve students into the design, because usually this happens at the end with the feedback. So the fact that it's ongoing, I found that really interesting. The question is, how was this whole system of designing welcomed by teachers? Because it looks to me that is quite quite a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of setting these up for each course or each session. And you might have covered this at the beginning. Sorry. Oh, okay. Because one of the, in my experience, one of the big point of resistance we have with designing with technology is really the work that you have to put up front in order to have something that works effectively.
I agree. Just on the first point about students' comments, that's entirely up to the teacher. I mean, it's easy to show. You've done your plan and you send it out to students and they fill in the feedback. You know, they can comment or they can comment on the individual activities. Theoretically, you could do that with a lesson plan now on paper. It's just that we happen not to. So, I mean, it doesn't enforce it. It just makes it easy to do. The point about it being a lot of work to do, it's true. If you're going to think about what's the best way to teach this, it does take a certain amount of time. And one of the interesting things that I've found in this process is how little time academics think about the great majority of what student learning time is. So they think about the face-to-face sessions. They don't really think at all about what else the students are doing and how they might go about doing it. And I think the online learning opportunities are an opportunity for teachers to think about that. Now, it is an increase. What we're trying to do with this is to make it as low a threshold as possible. And I mean, you might say that having a VLE takes a lot of time, which it does. You know, if you're using a VLE well, it takes an awful lot of time to work that out. And the dream is that this will be a front end which makes it all easier and just focuses you on the pedagogy without having to sort of fiddle so much. But if we're going to make the most of the technology, it is going to take more teacher time. And in a sense, that's the point of having this workload analysis, is to recognize that. Because you can't just switch from the old ways of doing everything into the new ways of doing everything without having some pretty serious investment of time on how to do it. Now, I think once you've got into it, once you've got the means by which you can adopt other people's ideas and other people's resources, and it becomes part of the way you work. I don't think it's impossible, but I think there is, I agree. I mean, there does have to be a recognition that this is not done in no time. And if we're going to try and do it in no time, which is what we've been doing for the last 40 years, we don't make the impact with the technology that it could be making, which is why we are where we are. Matt had a question, a final question.
Well, two things, actually, if that's all right. The first is a comment or a request. In terms of, obviously, and not surprisingly, maybe one of the things I really like is the movement to Moodle. But the request would be for things to be able to come back the other way as well, I guess, if you made changes in Moodle and adapted that design.
Absolutely, that would be a requirement, certainly.
But the other thing I wanted to kind of ask you to expand a little bit is one of my concerns with this type of thing, like with open educational resources, for example, is that actually people don't really want to reuse and adapt other people's things. But your middle bullet there says that it was welcomed by the teachers. Was that across the board, and were they grabbing other people's work and really playing with them? I've always had a bit of skepticism around that.
It varied, actually. I mean, there were certainly some people who said the sorts of things that Steve mentioned earlier. You know, he says, oh, this is far too constraining. Actually, it's not constraining at all. You know, it's just like a piece of paper, really. But there is a kind of natural response to that. But, I mean, I think what people liked about it was that it brought to teaching design a kind of play. It was partly the pie charts, I think, just having that sort of feedback on, you know, I'm going to try something, oh, look, that's what it does. It's kind of pleasing, that kind of thing. And it does, the focus is all on, so what is the student doing? And is that what I mean? Is that a reasonable thing? And that's sort of unusual. So I think there was some response like that. But what concerned us all the way through the project was making it as easy as possible and fitting in with the flow of what people are doing anyway. And since in higher education, at least, you have to send your design to the validation committee and so on, it should work with that sort of flow of that process. Now, we don't have to create lesson designs, but I think, as I said before, I think if we're going to make the most of the technology, we do have to. And we do have to look at what other people have done and build on that. That's a means of doing that, really. Let me continue with this focus now on, so what does it mean for the teacher? Because that's exactly what you've been asking, really. What does this do to teacher time? How are we doing? 5 minutes. Right. So this is a list of the kinds of activities that teachers do get engaged in. Class presentation, small group guidance, individual marking, collaborative development, preparation, which is your own preparation, preparation which is redesigning somebody else's. And this is a guesstimate of the kind of distribution we have for our traditional ways of teaching. And if we're going to move to being 20th century teachers, we ought to see that sort of shift. So you can see that what we've got is an increase in the kinds of activities which are meant to improve the learning experience. So that second, you see that first one is class presentation, less of that and more of small group guidance, more of individual marking, more of collaborative development, not so much individual personal design, more redesign of what other people have done, and more sharing of what we've prepared. And then we come to the fantasy bit of less administration. Ha ha. That's what the technology should be doing for us, but just frankly isn't. And what this is all about is shifting from the kind of whole class teaching, mass education kind of approach to those more individualized forms of teaching. That's one kind of benefit we should be seeing from being able to use technology more. And a shift from individual design to co-design, so teachers acting collaboratively. And if we want to model the learning experience and the teacher workload, that means estimating the effects of the decisions we make. So this is just going through what underlies that modeling, how we make those pedagogical and time different relationships. So what you're doing when you're designing is you're selecting teaching learning activities, and they might be quite simple ones like lecture and tutorial, or they might be more technology-oriented ones. And what you end up with at the bottom line is some distribution of learning time and a certain amount of teacher time needed. And the assumptions the model makes is that when you select teaching learning activities, you're defining the type of learning you're offering, deciding on the size of group. So you might have small groups of 5, or you might have small groups of 20, and that's going to make a difference. And you decide on the teacher time needed. So those assumptions are made in the model. The learning hours are distributed across all the different teaching learning activities, and there's a certain amount of credit hours you've got to meet. And that's what is taken into account in building the pie chart and the distribution of student learning time. And those are the parameters which are used to work out the teacher time. That's where the pie chart comes from, and that's what generates that analysis of where teacher time goes. So when we come to comparing these, and if we're looking at a comparison between, here's a particular conventional model for, I think this is a higher education example, compared with a blended learning model. And you can see that what this has done in this case is to give you more active learning. You've got a lot of learning through acquisition in that one, rather less here and a bit more learning through collaboration. And it also has this representation of how the student numbers change as you, from year 1, you've got 15 students, in year 2 you've got 15 students, and in year 3 and then ongoing you've moved up to 30. And it can calculate how much time you're needing in year 1, which is a lot because you're developing it for the first time. This is just in the conventional version. In the second year of doing it, or the second time you run it, you've still got some time in tweaking and correcting the faults you had the first time around, and after that you've just got a sort of regular updating and revising, and that should be your typical teacher hours per student. So this is done on a per student basis. So it's looking at what happens when you've got large student numbers as well as you move up. Now, when you're using more technology, still got 15, 30 students, but the initial year is much higher because this is technology and it takes more time to understand it, more time to learn it, more time to make good use of it. So what we've got is, although we've got more active learning, and we eventually get to lower per capita costs by doing some clever fiddling of numbers, we've got a much larger number in that first year. And the question is, how do we finance that? And where do we get that upfront development cost from? So all of your questions about teacher time have to address that as well, not just the ongoing time that we're going to do it on a normal basis, but if we're going to shift to this, there's an upfront investment cost as well. We don't have any means. In university schools or anywhere, there is no recognition of what it takes to shift from conventional to online methods. Nowhere in the world is there a country which has said, okay, this is going to take much more investment in teacher time for us to make this successful transition. I won't go into the spreadsheet, but this is another representation of that same kind of problem, because we're seeing a lot of expectation of what online learning is going to mean, and we're going to just put it all online, and we don't need teachers anymore, we probably don't need universities anymore. But if you're doing education, what you get as you move up through larger and larger cohorts, supposedly getting economies of scale, is yes, you can get some difference, but this is asymptotic to the amount of time it takes a teacher to give a student some support. And if you're doing education, you've always got to do some marking. You've always got to do some guidance and feedback and encouragement. There is always, for every student, there's going to be something like that, which is what counts as education. It never goes away. So no matter how clever you are at filling the numbers, this is just going to go like this as you get up to the 5,000 students that, for example, Stanford has on its MOOC. So if it were really an educational process, you will always have some cost. It's never going to come down to zero for teacher time, until such time as we get much, much cleverer learning technologies than we currently have. Well, maybe in the future, but we certainly haven't got them now. So I think it's important for us to consider what MOOCs mean, this massive open online courses, in case people haven't come across them, but there's a lot of excitement about these now. And opinion makers and politicians and people who are thinking about how we can make learning different are saying things like, we don't need teachers for this. You can just put the whole thing online. You get your star teacher doing the lecture, and then the student forum where they all help each other, and there's your education. No, it isn't. That's not education. That's a public library plus coffee bar. It's not education. So, coming back to the negative issues around the learning design, just now quickly to finish off. It's complex, it's potentially a tool of management control, it's an interpretation problem, and it needs to be topic focused. So people say, yes, it's very overwhelming, it takes a bit of getting used to, but actually once I get into it, it's not too bad, I can see it. But you know, it is more complex and you feel that it's going to be more difficult. People worry about managers and politicians and people taking it over and organizing everything, but personally I think knowledge is better. It's a weapon, and if teachers know more about what they're doing and why, I think then we can defend what we need more adequately. It's cute to have the pie charts, but I would go back and squidge my stuff, technical term here, reorganize my time because I would know it'd be a good thing, but that's because I think it's a good thing. If I didn't believe it wasn't a good thing, you would show me a pie chart that was 90% of one thing, I'd still think it's okay. Well, that's that evaluation point. I don't think we can evaluate. I think if people think it's 90% something or other, then that's up to them. They have to do the discovering, and with the peer group collaboration. So we can't evaluate, it can only be analysis. And people always want it to be a topic-oriented focus, and I think there's plenty of topic-oriented focus already. This is meant to be saying it's located in that topic in classroom teaching, but actually that pedagogy will work just as well in customer service, and you know, the dentistry pedagogy will work just as well in business or whatever. So I'm not too bothered about the topic-oriented bit. So, to sum up, teachers as innovative co-creators. This is what I think we're going to need if we're going to make the most of the technology. It means teachers adopting, adapting, testing, improving, and sharing their learning designs. Teaching becomes collaborative learning itself, with support from collaborative design tools of this kind, or something like it, and all those repositories of open education resources. And I think under that, we've got to have some theory-based computational representation of what we think learning is all actually about, and not just going with whatever the technology has to offer. We've got to critique it. That's the book, and that's the project team. Steve and Ed Whitley and Rosa Pujadas from LSE were all involved in that. But what we might just finish with, maybe, is just reflecting on this. Is it feasible to see teaching in a different way? Do you think it is necessary to see it in this different kind of communitarian approach to what do we mean by teaching and how do we make learning work better? It's occasioned by the technology, it's enabled by the technology, but we do have to embrace the technology. Is this going to help? So that's where I end for any questions and comments, challenges. Oh, thank you.
We've been trying to live tweet everything you've been saying.
Oh.
Yeah, well, sort of.
That must be hard. What I say doesn't usually fit in 140 characters, I'm afraid. I wish it did. No, I'm sure it's fine. Yeah.
I just had a thought. I was really, thinking through this slide. So I work here in the Teaching and Learning Centre. We work with academic staff, and one of the things that's always struck me that is very different in academia is that research is collaborative, but teaching is individual. And underlying that is probably a sense that teaching is very much focused on the lecturing model, that you're up there on your own. It's your knowledge that is required, and so on. And in a sense, it's an observation, really. What a sea change would be required, or it would be, that the kind of communitarian approach that is much more common in the consideration and forwarding of research might also be achieved in teaching, and where technology might facilitate that would be, seems a fascinating area of discovery. So that was just teachers as innovative co-creators of technology-based pedagogies. Wow.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with the sea change. It is different. It is a different way of thinking about it. And I think one of the reasons that open education resource repositories haven't really taken off is precisely because we do have a very personal approach to our teaching. We have a personal relationship with our subject matter. It's why we become teachers. We want to tell that story to acolytes and have them take it off into the world. So, there is that sense about teaching. So I don't think you can take away that personal engagement, which is why the idea of giving teachers a tool for creating and designing is, I think, should be more attractive than saying, here are some resources you can take over and just use as they are. But people don't, that's not what they want to do. They want to mess with the ideas. So, but having done that, and then, you have got all those students and you've got masses of teaching to deal with, being able to have some kind of starter kit to begin with, and here's actually a good idea, and I'm not the first person to teach this in the world, maybe I can learn from my colleagues. So I've got something to begin with, and then I can tweak it and change it, and then radically change it, and then rethink the whole thing. So I don't see why we shouldn't see teaching like that. And people very often do see teaching like that. But the opportunities we have to make the kinds of innovative changes that we now need are too few. And this is, I mean, this is really, it's a kind of campaign almost to say, there's a different way of thinking about this, and we need some things to happen to make this possible. But I agree it's to see change.
Teachers maybe at sort of teaching at school level, primary, secondary school level, might be more receptive to this approach than teachers in higher education. Do you see any differences between the groups? In, you know, I'm sort of thinking that it's much more common for people to recognise they need to do a postgraduate certificate to be a school teacher. It's only been more recently something people do at higher education level, so that might change their perceptions of teaching, perhaps. I don't know.
It is different. And one of the reasons we started with higher education in this, because originally the proposal was to work across all three sectors. But the ESRC said, no, just stick to higher education. And we wanted to stick to higher education if we had to choose one, because it's the most anarchic sector. It's not the one where you get, you know, required to do things with your teaching. So if you can crack HE, then you've done something quite useful. But certainly taking it into FE, people are much more receptive because it's much closer to what they do anyway. Yeah. Taking it into schools, similarly, I mean, there are, what are they called? Teaching schools, which train each other. And so we've got a special needs school, for example, who wants to help other schools develop their special needs teachers. And they're sharing learning patterns of this kind, which are essentially the kinds of learning lesson plans which they would typically generate. But the lesson plans that you find, whichever sector you're working in, the kind of planning which is done is very sketchy. And if you want to take some of those essentially quite good ideas into this, you have to invent a lot of, so what precisely are they doing at this point? And is this really discussion or is it really practice? And how long are they doing it for? You have no idea how long it's meant to be because they never say. So I think there's a lot to be done in all sectors in articulating the good pedagogy we already have that seems to be kind of working and then sharing it. So yes, you're right, there is more natural receptivity in the other sectors. And I think what it takes in higher education is for teachers in higher education to first of all recognize that this is a huge and wonderful opportunity for teaching and that we do teach, we reach more people and we teach better if we can take advantage of this. But also recognition by the leaders of higher education that we have to invest in this. We have to invest in it, and we have to invest in teaching. And doing this kind of thing is investing in teaching. And we're not going to make any difference with the technologies without that. I think it is more difficult though.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'd like you all to join me in thanking Diana for what's been fascinating and stimulating discussion. Thank you very much.
And great questions too. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just announce the next Network Ed session? A complete change of tack. The next Network Ed session is on the 5th of December, and it'll be Carl Miller from Demos, who's also based at King's Policy Institute, and he'll be talking on the topic of truth, lies, and the internet. I think that'll be well worth coming to. So please do book, and I hope to see many of you on the 5th of December. Thank you.